yeah, I was going to. So I'm Stephen. I was going to co-chair with Connor today. I don't think Connor's with us yet, but I'm sure Connor will be along soon. And we're specifically going to discuss agroecology in South America. So Jeff has kindly volunteered to help out with some translation. How would you like to do this, Jeff? Should we try and keep it to short chunks of information, or
you can say.
I just got muted. Yeah, I mean, is it for Carlos that I'll talk for Carlos?
Yes,
first Carlos talk for like a paragraph or so, and then I translate like a paragraph worth of talking.
Yeah.
So
that sounds like a plan. Yeah. Okay, so should we'll get started then. So yeah, welcome to everyone, which I think is the fourth of the Peace in Kurdistan Ecology Network series. So yeah, I'm really pleased we're going to be talking about agroecology in Mexico today. So the Peace in Kurdistan Ecology Network, we've just put a little bit of information up on the website, and I think we're going to put some more up, but this is on the Peace in Kurdistan Network. So I'm just going to pop this into the chat a moment. Can get through to chat. Okay, you should be able to see that link there. So that's the link to the statement. So we've described it as a forum to discuss the advancement of international projects relating to social ecology, democratic confederalism, and solidarity economy. And the basic idea behind this group is to, first of all, share ideas and key readings, but really to strengthen communication and solidarity between international initiatives in this area. So the international aspect of that is really important to us, and obviously today the connections through to Brazil and Bolivia, that will be fantastic. And then trying to build bridges a bit further between the democratic confederalism as practiced by the Kurdish freedom movement and the wider social movements such as the climate justice movement and the ecology movement. Perhaps it'd be nice, first of all, maybe there's not that many of us here today, so perhaps we can do a loop round and introduce ourselves. So maybe I'll go first, and then I'll nominate somebody randomly, and then I'll introduce our hopefully three speakers today. So I'm based in Bristol in the west of England. So
we can't see you though.
No, I'm not sure where it doesn't seem like there's a camera on this machine. I've my home connection can be a bit unreliable, and I thought as I was chairing today, I'd make sure I had a solid connection on a university network. So I'm confident that I won't be thrown out, but I don't think the camera is well, I'm not even sure. Possibly there isn't a camera on here. Also, there's a I mean, I can see you okay, so don't know what's going on with that. And there's obviously the microphone and everything is working fine. So yeah. So yeah, my involvement with the network was through writing and editing a book about the ecological pillar of the Kurdish freedom movement, which was called Ecological Solidarity in the Kurdish freedom movement. So this is quite timely for me today. I'm really pleased that we're looking at agroecology, because I'm just really scoping a new project on food production. So that's great for me. And I may need to leave sort of fairly soon after 4 o'clock, because I'm actually doing a little bit of volunteering on a project for Japanese natural agriculture, and I will find out a bit more about that over the next couple of days. So I'll need to leave Bristol and go back to Wiltshire for that. So food production, agriculture is sort of very much on my mind at the moment. Let me see, shall I nominate? Well, on the top of my list, I've got Sonia. Would you like to introduce yourself, Sonia? Hi.
Hello, thank you for your introduction. It's brilliant. My name is Sonia Karimi. I'm working alongside Peace in Kurdistan. However, I also work for Kajar, which is the Eastern Kurdistan's women's community. And I'm also doing this ecology aspect of things because I believe is critical at this stage. not just globally, but also in terms of Kurdistan and where it's heading. Nice to meet you all. And I will choose Carlos to introduce himself next.
Thank you, Sonia. Hi, everybody. And my name is Carlos Flores. I am based in Tarija, Bolivia. I've been working in a research project with Les and colleagues from Brazil. I am an agricultural engineer, and I work with peasant communities and organizations here in Bolivia about these ecological and territorial aspects. I do understand English. I speak fairly, so I will be speaking in Spanish, and somebody is going to translate. I believe is our Jeff. Sorry,
Yeah.
Jeff.
That's okay.
And I hope this goes all right. Nice meeting you all.
So yeah, your English is good enough where you can correct me if I get you wrong. So
Yes.
You'll do fine.
Thank you, Carlos.
It's an art. I'm not very skilled or experienced in doing simultaneous translation, so we'll have to bear with me. But anyhow, I'll try.
And Carlos, would you like to pick somebody else to introduce
yes.
themselves from the list?
Yes, please. Oh, since we're talking with Jeff, please, Jeff, I'd like to meet you, please.
Sure.
Thank you.
My name's Thomas Jeffrey Miley. I go by Jeff, even though my for some reason my Zoom says Thomas on it. I teach political sociology at the University of Cambridge. I'm a member of this Peace in Kurdistan Ecology Network. Also a member of Peace in Kurdistan more generally. I work on struggles for self-determination in the 21st century. Recently, I've been working very closely with struggles for self-determination in the informal settlements in Kenya. And I'm happy to see we have Gacheke Gachihi and Brian Mathenge are both here with us today from Kenya. So why don't I nominate Gacheke?
Thank you very much, Jeff, for introducing me. I hope I can be heard. I'm a bit in a park where it's a bit noisy. I really appreciate for this meeting. Very inspiring to connect with the comrades from Bolivia, Brazil, and I think from the introduction, it's very important space for sharing idea, building up solidarity. As now this time we are facing a major crisis in the world. Everywhere, even here in Nairobi, people are protesting on the high cost of living, the skyrocketing prices of the basic commodities. So it's a major struggle. So I agree it is a space of exchange of ideas and connecting different struggles inspired by a Kurdish movement struggle. My name is Gashehe. I coordinate Maadare Social Justice Center, which is a community-based organization. We have also worked with the Jeff, and we have inspired a path for a grassroots political movement for self-determination, bringing different urban youth groups together, some doing environmental work, some doing work with against police brutality, and the documentation of the human rights violations. So there's a great opportunity to link up, and I'm very inspired to have been invited to this meeting, also to Comrade Stella, and long live the struggle of Kurdish people and freedom to Comrade Ottawa.
Oh, thank you so much, Gachichi. Would you like to nominate?
Sorry, I didn't introduce another friend, but
yes,
now
you need
I
to
can
introduce another person.
I see this Comrade Les Levido, see very close to me.
Okay, Les.
Okay, yes. Yeah. I mean, I wear many different hats through my activities. So, one has been supporting the Kurdish struggles since around the year 2000 with the projects organized by Estella, and another is academic research on many topics, including the conflicts over transgenic crops, biotech, and the struggles for alternatives, such as agroecology. Okay, Felix.
Thanks. So I'm Felix Pardal. I'm in London right now, just flew back yesterday from India, and I've worked mainly as a kind of anthropologist activist with indigenous people in India, a little bit in Latin America, but my main work has been in India, but also connecting with the Kurdish struggles for 20, 30 years and trying to make links between especially activist struggles in India and Kurdistan, among many, many other things. So great to be here, really appreciating. And may I then nominate as the next person, Jihad Hami.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Felix. I'm Jihad. I'm from Rojava. I'm Kurdish. And I am right now living in Germany. And I am part of the ecological project for peace in Kurdistan. I will nominate Saleh Mamoun.
Sorry, was it me?
Yeah.
Yeah, my name is Saleh Mamoun. I am happily retired head teacher. I got involved in the Kurdish struggle through Estella, because working together and campaigning against criminalizing communities, and also part of the delisting of PKK, and got interested in Abdullah Öcalan's ideas. So there's been a long sort of 10, 20 years involvement in that kind of issues. I've also been involved in the Palestinian struggle for self-determination. My current interest is in self-determination and democracy in Sudan. So I've been focusing on the Sudan resistance movement. And my interest in agroecology, ecological freedom, etc., I think arises from the fact that I think humanity as a whole faces an ecological crisis, and that's an existential threat. And those issues surrounding that must be resolved. I nominate Estella.
Ah, sorry, my cough. Well, very briefly, what are the key points? I have been involved with the Kurdish freedom movement since 1985, basically since the start of the struggle and the struggle of the Kurdish freedom movement in Europe. I met Öcalan in 1991, key point, and issues were discussed that led to the formation of the Peace in Kurdistan campaign in 1994, with a whole lot of key people all around the globe, including Chomsky, Harold Pinter, writers, lawyers, activists, politicians. Basically, Peace in Kurdistan, and that's important for everybody to know, is focusing in a global way on the struggle for self-determination of all peoples and creating the links between the Kurdish freedom movement and the international movements, including now networks of lawyers, academics, trade unionists, activists, and other people. So we work both in cooperation with the freedom movement and independent. We are creating the links around them. So, and obviously our website at the moment, if I might emphasize that, has been developed in order to discuss the ideas leading to a formation of, if you like, global struggles on the issue of self-determination, global conflicts, terrorism laws, etc. So it's quite an ambitious project. Okay, so and the PIK Ecology network came out of the discussion to focus on the very important issues of ecology and economy. That's briefly it.
Thank you, Estella. Right, okay, I think we'll probably be ready for Les to start your presentation. I just wondered, would it be useful? I've got a sort of working definition of what I think agroecology is. Would it be useful for me to share that, or is that something that you will cover in your presentation anyway, Les?
Oh, yes, of course. Yeah, I will cover it. Yeah. And if you can give me the screen sharing facility, then I'll bring up a
Ooh,
PowerPoint
okay.
file.
Yeah, I think, are you able to help out with that as host, Sonia?
Yes, I'm just going to try.
Fabulous.
I think I have to make him a co-host.
Yeah, that's another way to do it.
Done. You should be able to do so now.
Okay. Okay, you can see that now.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll make it larger.
Yeah, that's clear. It's in, that's it. That's the
Okay.
full screen.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so the title is as in the publicity, except I added a subtitle, Counter-Hegemonic Rules, which I will explain. So this joint presentation comes from our research project, research partnership for an agroecology-based solidarity economy, which we gave the short name AgroEcos, with case studies in Bolivia and Brazil. So here's our logo. So I explain the context is the hegemonic capitalist model of agricultural modernization. So the hegemonic agri-food system combines several elements: a capital-intensive techno-diffusionist model, also known as the Green Revolution for short, globalized supply chains, especially to supply animal feed and the materials for processed food from the basic commodity crops, resource plunder, especially land and water, and especially in the global south, and a narrative of modernization, which disparages other forms of agriculture as backward, ignorant, inefficient. This model has shifted farmers' practices towards more complex technological tools and institutional arrangements, which seek a competitive advantage in distant markets, and especially for those basic commodity crops, such as soya and maize. It seeks a high-yield techno-diffusional model, which means high inputs of materials, originally hybrid seeds, then later transgenic seeds, agrochemicals such as pesticides and fertilizers, machinery to deal with those inputs and the harvest. And of course, these inputs incur financial debt, which must be repaid. How? Through greater production for more lucrative products to be sold in any markets globally. Under this system, farmers become propertied under laborers, subordinated to an industrial type process. I mean, you'll recognize the phrase under laborer from Marx, describing the shift from manufacture to machinofacture. And then the US sociologist Jack Kloppenberg extended that concept to the paradox of farmers in North America owning their own land, so they are propertied, but they become under laborers, subordinated to that process. This system has dispossessed millions of farmers all over the world, I mean, including the global north, but even more so in the global south, while degrading the natural resource base of agricultural production. So a significant alternative has come from what we call ecosol agroecology as a convergence of social movements for agroecology, solidarity economy, and feminism. This is especially prominent with those labels, in Latin America. Now, to some extent, agroecology gives to a wide range of traditional practices, but they all have in common to recycle and share locally available natural resources. These methods reproduce biodiverse seeds, maintain wider biodiversity for crop resilience, recycle nutrients, together minimizing with
You're breaking up a little bit, Les. I don't know if other people can hear you.
No. Les?
stops working. Is that better?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird. I'll put it in the other port and see what happens. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're fine now, Les. Yeah,
Okay,
thank you.
I just switched it from one port to the other. It's a kind of mystery. Anyway, so these methods are used by most peasants, small-scale producers, not all, but most in the global South. And such producers supply about 70% of the food which is locally consumed in the global South. They do so by using much less land than agri-industrial systems, which are monocrop systems, mainly supplying those distant markets or inputs for ultra-processed food. Agroecology, oh, here comes Davis, right? So agroecology can have a high productivity, if you understand this is a ratio of high output through multi-cropping, there's multiple crops on the same land, with a low external material input. In other words, it uses high knowledge input in order to use local resources, which are not external inputs. The agroecology concept originally identified and investigated a scientific ecological basis for traditional practices as a means to improve them. So eventually, this concept became grounded in agrarian agendas and social movements resisting capitalist modernization, especially in Latin America. Women have a prominent role in such movements, responding to the hegemonic system that degrades the natural resources, which are the basis of life, especially agriculture, and which generally favors men for access to the financial credit necessary in the techno-diffusionist model. So this has been summarized as a transformative agroecology with three complementary forms: as a science, a practice, and social movement. That not all forms of agroecology have that transformative role, but this is a description of some as a political agenda. Now, let's move to Economía Social y Solidaria, which is a commonplace term in Latin America, or ECOSOL for short. So this is based on mutual aid, reciprocity, cooperation, both within and among enterprises, seeking an alternative to dominant competitive markets, and as a means to raise members' incomes. It's based on democratic collective self-management of enterprises and markets. And this generally means collective marketing and solidarity markets. The general concept here is circuitos cortos, which in English is normally expressed as short supply chains, as in the cortos, bringing producers closer to consumers who better understand and support the production methods. The concept circuit court has at least one origin in France, where it originally meant specialty products with quality labels, but later it was extended to agroecological products being promoted for their sustainable production process, not necessarily for specific qualities. And this became a strategy to create a larger scale alternative to agro-industrial systems. In Latin America, the Ecosol agenda, or circuitos cortos, has diverse origins. For example, as they were called, fábricas recuperadas, recovered factories. When an employer simply abandoned the factory for economic reasons, it was inviable, then sometimes the workers occupied it and took it over and then created their own collective management. And then sort of discovered economy of solidarity by necessity. And another source is artisanal producers, often in the informal economy, coming together to create the basis for collective marketing, even if each continues to do its own production on their own. There's been a strong participation by women, especially indigenous and Black women in Brazil, given their marginalization and exploitation in both the formal economy and informal economy. In Andean countries, such as Bolivia, Ecuador, Peru, the term communitarian economy is a more prevalent term with diverse meanings, which Carlos can explain if you like. But it's the nearest equivalent to Economia Solidaria. Now, I emphasize the convergence between those two social movements, and the convergence itself has many forms. And that in turn depends on which participants. So they have diverse origins. So it encompasses peasants at the border of the capitalist economy, where they would otherwise be dependent on wholesalers who drive down the farm gate prices and extract much of the product value. It includes smaller scale producers, especially women, in various kinds of artisanal production, otherwise dependent on the informal economy. Indigenous groups in subsistence agriculture, largely outside the market economy, but seeking to gain income to buy other necessities of life. For the circuitos cortos, these have many different forms. It's just a general concept. It includes farmers markets, known as feiras de agricultor, public procurement, or known as institutional sales, or purchases is another name, community-supported agriculture, whereby people subscribe to a scheme and thereby sharing the risks and benefits, and they gladly accept whatever combination of products they get in the weekly food basket. As regards, women's involvement, there's a key concept in Latin America, protagonismo femenino, which emphasizes women's leadership. So this agenda has been an opportunity to elaborate feminist practices and concepts, especially through women's initiatives, where they do collective marketing of artisanal products or create their own enterprise together. It also includes women's collectives within the settlements of the landless workers movement, the MST. So I was intrigued to see when Davis organized a visit to one of these settlements. I learned that these collectives are called like the Alexandra Kollontai Brigade, and it's one of many examples. These experiences have generated rich literature on potential for women's emancipation, as well as highlighting the limitations, in particular, that just as women's labor remains devalued and invisible in the capitalist economy, it sometimes remains so within these alternatives. So there's a constant struggle to gain more formal recognition of their contribution. And moreover, they face a double burden, or carga doble or triple, meaning that their domestic responsibilities or wider reproductive responsibilities continue at the same time as they are spending more time on these initiatives. Now, I'll turn briefly to the case of Brazil, partly because it is the most successful and prominent case in Latin America. Of course, it's the largest country by population, but it also had strong movements making demands and creating pilot projects along these lines for several decades. And eventually there was a formal convergence, in a sense, between the two main networks of social movements, the agroecology one on the left and the Ecosol on the right, which held a joint conference, I think around 2011, and that solidified this convergence, whereby each began to adopt the other's agenda, thereby integrating the Ecosol with Agroecology. And all of Brazil's governments have strongly supported agribusiness, called agronegócio, along the lines of the modernization model that I mentioned before, through various special measures, basically large subsidies to help with the export markets, which are the primary objective, to gain foreign exchange, very expensive irrigation projects in semi-arid areas where otherwise agriculture would be less viable, perhaps only for subsistence purposes. For several decades, civil society groups have demanded support measures for these alternatives. And finally, when the Partido de los Trabajadores, PT, was able to lead the government in 2003 up till 2016, those governments established many important support measures for agroecology and economic solidarity along the lines that had been demanded by those social movements. For example, training for small-scale producers to consolidate their products for collective marketing through this PIK scheme, public procurement, especially for school meals, whereby they pay a 30% premium price for organic food. And that leads crucially to the next point, because until then, the only way to gain official organic certification was to pay for an expensive service by a third party to do the certification. So the social movements demanded that the Agriculture Ministry establish a scheme whereby the producers themselves could exchange knowledge in a way that helps them to improve their agroecological methods as a basis to do a collective certification of their products. And this became called the Organização de Controle Social, or OCS, whereby many collective initiatives have gained the organic certification with all sorts of advantages, including this premium price. And another crucial demand has been secure land tenure, for example, for the MST settlements and for indigenous people, as promised under the 1988 Constitution, but hardly delivered so far. And then in parallel, the government created a national council for Ecosol, which helped to establish local and regional networks of training programs, as in the case that Davis will present. In our project, we looked at many critical concepts that would help us to analyze these developments. And we looked at those in particular to understand circuitos cortos, where the term short often has been understood as socially proximate in many ways, including proximity between producers and consumers. And one of our community partners had already developed this concept on this slide, the economy of proximity, which has multiple meanings. It means there are common solidaristic purposes, such as the ones I mentioned before, mutual aid, democratic self-governance, and so on. And these purposes activate and link other proximities, including cultural proximity, can mean common cultural characteristics, elders' wisdom, religious festivals, agricultural knowledge, traditional foods. Geographical proximity can be used to help establish social cohesion. Organizational proximity brings together producers so they can mutualize their resources and share those resources to establish relationships of confidence, reciprocity, and solidarity. And institutional proximity includes interactions with professional staff and public authorities, which can provide support measures for ecosol activities. So we use this framework to understand how such initiatives build collective capacities for the secretos cortos of ecosol agroecology. And that was a key research question of the project, before it began. Now here I just briefly mentioned the COVID-19 crisis because by coincidence, not planned, our project began just before this crisis erupted, and then we had to change all our plans for our research methods. The hygiene restrictions disrupted all supply chains, especially food supply chains, including capitalist ones, as well as the farmers' markets of ecosol agroecology. The COVID-19 crisis both revealed and intensified various harms from the dominant system, especially food insecurity and malnutrition. Many governments and global elites saw a return to normal, or more subtly put, as building back better, that is overcoming systemic vulnerabilities in order to restore economic growth in global supply chains of the dominant system. In response, opposition forces have been seeking to create a different normal. In Latin America, activists have raised the slogan, "No, we won't return to normality because normality was the problem." Now you can see from the date, this is long before the pandemic. It came from the movement against neoliberalism and state repression in Chile. But then when the pandemic began, the slogan was taken up more widely by social movements in Latin America to describe the entire system of normality, that must be overcome. When the crisis began, these ecosol agroecology networks adapted to the hygiene requirements in many ways by adapting for farmers markets or creating replacements for them. They found alternative means to continue sales, to build closer relationships with consumers, and to learn from each other's efforts. They extended various forms of social proximity along with capacities for them. Our project had been designed as participatory action research, whereby each research team was collaborating with a community partner already involved in ecosol agroecology. When the pandemic began, we then facilitated and publicized their efforts through webinars. And here's the publicity for one of the first ones. So it said, Economia Solidaria, Agroecology confronts or encounters the COVID-19 pandemic, with talks about each of the 3 case studies from the people leading them. And here that leads to the same kind of presentation now from Carlos and Davis. So they'll each explain their case study. That's all. So stop share.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Les. Does anybody have any 1 or 2 questions immediately, and then we can move on to Carlos to give a presentation? I'd be interested to know a little bit more about the sort of formal relationship between Ecosol and you mentioned the landless, with the MST, the landless workers movement, and groups like La Via Campesina. What is the relationship? Are they fellow travelers, or is there a more formal relationship between the two?
You mean between the MST and Via Campesina?
Well, they're Yeah, they're very much affiliated, but between the sort of producer consumer solidarity networks and the food co-ops and that you've been outlining for us.
Well, some of them are, essentially involved in La Via Campesina. Others perhaps are aware of those networks and draw on the concepts, but maybe less involved. And so I'm not sure exactly how to answer the question, but the ideas and the practices are spread certainly throughout Latin America, regardless of formal organizational links.
Okay, yeah, because I think you used the word convergence at one point for some of the way that these groups are kind of operating with each other. So.
Yes, and La Via Campesina emphasizes much more food sovereignty than economy of solidarity, although they would see these as related. And our project shows economy of solidarity, partly because that is in the policy framework of Brazil or Bolivia with a different name, Economia Comunitaria, and groups adopt those labels as an umbrella to encompass many different kind of movements. Well, food sovereignty is less often the name of a national network. It's certainly central to global networks, but I think I'll stop there so we can move on.
Okay, thank you. I can see that Salah, you have your hand up.
Yes, I have. I think I'm not quite sure whether. Well, my question entirely relates to what you're talking about in terms of your research project. I was wondering whether any developments in Cuba at all. Something similar happening there or not.
Oh yes, well, especially after they lost the oil imports from the Soviet Union. Yeah, in fact, Cuba was one of the pioneers, again, by necessity, right? And then they developed the concept agricultura sin petróleo, agriculture without oil, meaning oil had been the basis of the whole agro-industrial model, and cheap oil, right? In order to produce the chemical inputs to run the machinery and so on. And then Cuba developed a whole system of urban agriculture. With low external inputs and no oil, or almost none. But that would be another story.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's very relevant practice though, isn't it? Yeah. Does anybody have any other questions now, or maybe we can move on to Carlos and then we can come back to the wider discussion afterwards? Okay, Carlos and Jeff, the translation.
Okay, Jeff, here we go.
Okay, a ver cómo lo hacemos.
Okay, I need to be a co-host.
Yes.
I have some slides that will help us. Sonia.
See, I can make him host, but I don't see how to make him co-host.
Just make him host. I couldn't find the co-host option either.
Yeah,
I've no longer got control. Les does.
Well, I can make him host, but not co-host. I don't see that up. So should I do that?
Make him host.
Okay, here we go. All right.
Okay. Okay. Can you see the presentation?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine, Carlos. Thank you.
Okay. I will be speaking in Spanish, but I want to focus on this part of the reassessment, the redescubrimiento of the proximity short supply chains.
Rediscovery.
The rediscovery, yeah, of this short supply chains during the pandemic as a key concept of my presentation, which gave us a lot of things to think about of our research questions. Bueno, en Bolivia trabajamos en un sitio en el medio de al sur de Bolivia, en el medio de los Andes, en las montañas de los Andes, que se llama el Valle Central de Tarija.
So in Bolivia, we work in the middle of the south of Bolivia, the Valle Central of the Central Valley of Tarija.
El Central Valley of Tarija es un valle muy amplio que está ubicado a una altitud media donde se desarrollan una gran cantidad de comunidades campesinas que históricamente han luchado por la conquista de la tierra, al igual que en el resto de Bolivia, y que conviven en un contexto donde hay una ciudad, un centro urbano que concentra la actividad económica, política, y ellos siguen luchando por sobreponerse, resolver esta situación de subalternidad.
So it's a very wide valley located at a sort of medium altitude where peasants are fighting against a subaltern condition. You maybe speak a little bit less because I couldn't follow. I followed it, but I can't remember everything you say. So maybe a little bit less. Give me time, and I'll translate. Yeah.
Okay.
Shorter pieces, because otherwise it's harder for me to remember everything.
Okay. Entonces, comunidades campesinas que históricamente han luchado por la conquista de la tierra y actualmente lo siguen haciendo.
So there peasant communities that historically fought for the conquering of the land and are continuing to fight for the land.
Entonces, nosotros trabajamos con el sujeto campesino en dos situaciones. Una situación de una organización comunitaria y una situación de una organización asociativa, que es el estudio de caso que vamos a discutir ahora.
Okay, so we work with peasant communities in two different types. What are the two types again?
Una organización comunitaria y otra asociativa.
Communitarian organizations and associative organizations.
Para esto tenemos que tomar en cuenta que la agroecología y la economía solidaria, como explicó Jeff, no son términos ni conceptos ajenos a la vida campesina, sino que se relacionan muy fuertemente porque están conectados con toda su tradición ancestral, cultural, que tienen en sus formas de vida.
Yeah, so as Les explained, we have to keep in mind that these concepts of agriculture, agroecology are not alien to the lives of the peasants, that they've used it in their traditional activities.
Incluso cuando se habla de producción orgánica, que es un término más común en el caso de Bolivia, no tanto agroecología, los campesinos han logrado adaptar este término, apropiarse de este término y darle un sentido de construcción social.
So even when they talk about organic production, the peasants have appropriated this concept and use it as a form of social production.
La bioferia, que es la organización asociativa que ahora vamos a comentar, es una organización de mujeres campesinas que provienen de diferentes comunidades del Valle Central de Tarija, que producen orgánicamente y tienen una feria, se reúnen una vez a la semana en la ciudad de Tarija a vender sus productos.
So the Bioferia is an organization of women peasants who come together, and they have a market, a feria. They come together on a weekly basis in the city of Tarija.
Es un grupo de entre 50 a 70 mujeres que varía en su número, pero vienen a Tarija, o sea, vienen a la ciudad de Tarija y tienen un espacio en una calle donde ellos venden sus productos.
So it's an organization between 50 and 70 women, and they come to Tarija and they have a space on a street where they sell their products.
Cuando acontece la pandemia, cuando empieza la pandemia, de repente estas mujeres agricultoras agroecológicas ya no pudieron vender sus productos, lo cual generó una crisis muy fuerte, una crisis económica muy fuerte en estas familias que se vieron de repente, se sintieron como que ya no podían reproducir su economía.
So when the pandemic began, the women couldn't sell their products, and this created a really strong crisis in their families, and they felt that they couldn't reproduce themselves anymore.
Entonces, en coincidencia con nuestro proyecto, buscamos resolver este problema, que era también el problema de los consumidores, porque la gente en la ciudad de repente tampoco tenía acceso a comida fresca, mecanismos de acceso a comida fresca. Y de esa manera es que buscamos una respuesta alternativa inmediata para resolver eso.
So as their project was beginning, they decided to search for ways to solve this problem, which is also a consumer problem, because the consumers no longer had access to fresh food. And so, yeah.
Y desarrollamos esta idea de la canasta campesina, que es un peasant basket, que es un mecanismo que finalmente entendemos se adoptó en todas partes en el mundo, en muchas partes.
So they came up with this idea of a peasant basket, which was something that actually was developed in many parts of the world.
Empezamos nosotros a, bueno, inicialmente nos parecía a nosotros una innovación, algo muy innovativo, algo muy novedoso, pero nos percatamos al poco tiempo de trabajar de que se trataba del mismo circuito corto, que funcionaba en la feria, en la calle, solamente que en esta vez era por vías virtuales, lo llamamos circuito corto.
So at first it appeared to them that it was very innovative, but then they came to realize that it was the same short supply circuit that was used in the feria, but only virtually.
Short supply chain o circuito corto.
Yeah, short supply chain, yeah.
Entonces, bueno, empezamos a trabajar desde este redescubrimiento del circuito corto a una reconstrucción de este circuito corto en estas nuevas condiciones de la virtualidad, ¿no? De la pandemia, pero también redescubriendo y reconstruyendo los sentidos esenciales de los circuitos cortos, de los alimentos ancestrales que se estaban fragmentando en estos tiempos de globalización capitalista de la agricultura.
So we began to work from the rediscovery of the short supply chain and the reconstruction to the towards the essential meanings of the ancestral circuits that were being fragmented under the pressures of the global capitalist supply chains.
Así tuvimos la oportunidad de diseñar un sentido de solidaridad, porque tanto los productores como los consumidores y los voluntarios que se involucraron en este mecanismo, que fueron muchas personas, comenzamos a diseñar un sistema que recupere los sentidos de la urgencia de resolver un problema de la sociedad para el alimento.
So we had the opportunity to design meanings of solidarity between the suppliers, the consumers, the many volunteers who worked on this to rediscover the sense of urgency given the crisis with respect to food.
Entonces, ya analizando después nuestra experiencia en los espacios del proyecto, nos percatamos de que se movilizaron muchos principios comunitarios, ¿no? Muchos principios de la vida en comunidad, ¿no? Como eran, por ejemplo, la autoorganización para proveer alimento a grupos en necesidad, la disponibilización de las organizaciones, de las instituciones para la gente, ¿no? El trabajo voluntario muy intensivo, la valoración de la producción campesina, la revalorización, la recuperación del conocimiento tradicional alimentario, la solidaridad, el cuidado mutuo y otros principios comunitarios.
So analyzing our experience, we realized that there are many communitarian concepts that were being mobilized, including the self-organization of supply and provisioning groups, social availability of institutional resources, intense volunteer work, valuation of local peasant production, recovery of traditional food knowledge, solidarity, mutual care, etc.
Entonces, para nosotros fue claro de que no se trataba solo de circuitos cortos, sino de circuitos cortos que se movilizaban, se articulaban en torno a la solidaridad, ¿no? Algo que lo hemos pensado como la proximidad, circuitos cortos de proximidad.
So for us, it became clear that this was not only a matter of short supply chains, but that these short supply chains were mobilized for the purpose of solidarity. So they started using the sense of construction of proximity as opposed to the short circuit co-opted by the simply commercial logic.
Correcto. Entonces, cuando termina la pandemia, estos mecanismos comunitarios aparentemente también se contraen, ¿no? Y algo como lo que comentaba Les, el retorno a la nueva normalidad significó una recomposición de estos circuitos cortos en los términos del intercambio del mercado comercial mayormente.
So when the pandemic ends, the mechanisms of solidarity contract. With the return to normality, you get a recomposition in terms of the market.
Y para nuestra sorpresa, algunas personas que participaban de este circuito corto de los consumidores se mantuvo solidariamente para funcionando la canasta campesina en los términos pensados de solidaridad, pero en un tamaño mucho menor. Antes teníamos más de 500 personas involucradas y actualmente tenemos unas 30 a 40 personas involucradas en este circuito corto solidario de proximidad.
To our surprise, some people continue participating, working with the community baskets, but it was a much smaller group of people. So it went down from 500 to about 30 people that were continuing to work within this sort of solidarity understanding of the circuito corto.
Entonces, la proximidad es un concepto que recuperamos nosotros como muy importante y que se expresa en muchas dimensiones, ¿no? Y esto lo recuperamos porque la crisis causada por la pandemia fue enfrentada en este contexto de nuestro estudio de caso por la activación de los mecanismos comunitarios para poder enfrentarla y sobrellevarla.
Yeah, so the proximity concept is something we recuperated, expressed in many dimensions, because the crisis caused by the pandemic activated this, as he puts it here, mechanisms to achieve resilience in the face of unforeseen change.
Entonces, el circuito corto se presentó, este circuito corto solidario de proximidad, como un ejemplo notable de trabajo para la construcción y reconstrucción de la sociedad en situaciones críticas como la pandemia.
So this short circuit of food supply, understood in the solidaristic sense, then becomes a notable example of the possibility of societal reconstruction in the context of a crisis.
Entonces, la valoración de la solidaridad en los procesos estos de proximidad es un tema fundamental que con la experiencia de la bioferia hemos podido entender como un elemento que debe ser tratado en la política pública para fortalecer estos mecanismos para futuros eventos críticos que se van a presentar y que la política pública tiene que poner principal atención para poder dotarle a la sociedad de estos mecanismos para que puedan autónomamente enfrentar estas futuras crisis sociales de diferente tipo.
So in the valorization of the solidarity proximity processes, they noted that the pandemic showed that mechanisms such as those in the bioferia are important to preserve and to promote in the public sphere and public policy from consumers, particularly thinking about crises that can come in the future. Thinking about proximity processes and making them explicit is something that we can use in the future in confronting crises.
Entonces, como conclusión, nosotros llevamos de que procesos de transformación de la sociedad que vivimos, en el caso de Bolivia, de una fundación del Estado, de la sociedad, en términos de construir nuevas formas de convivencialidad de la sociedad, tiene un punto central, clave, muy importante en los sistemas alimentarios y en estos circuitos cortos, porque atacan centralmente a la relación que se establece entre la sociedad y la naturaleza por el conocimiento alimentario. Y el circuito corto ahí es un mecanismo importante que nos permite avanzar en esa transformación.
I lost you a little bit there. But what I caught was that in the construction of new forms of coexistence, these circuitos cortos are a place of attacking the capitalistic form of supply chains because they mobilize food knowledge. But you were coming in and out. I don't know if you want to try to repeat that so so I can get a better. No se te escucha. Can anyone else hear him?
Yeah.
We just
No, I think we've lost a link
just
there
lost
possibly.
Y algunas palabras perdidas.
Aló, aló.
No, there-
Sí,
Se
al
perdió.
fin.
¿Qué?
Oh, we're back on.
Sí, se te escuchó. No se escucha. Ahora sí.
Sí, escucho. Solamente at the end of my presentation, I wanted to point that this matter of the food chains and the short food chains are very important for the transformation that we are living of the country in this new vision of incorporating this the struggle of these peasant communities and indigenous people and the food chain affects the autonomy of these groups, which in turn it's very important to fight for the modernization of the democracy of these countries. I think that we are and now. I think
Te expresas muy bien en inglés, podrías haber hecho la presentación en inglés, porque mejor que
No,
cuando
no.
intento recordarla y hacer la traducción.
No, you did very good. Okay, thank you, Jeff. Hi, Davis. And now I will, I think, make anfitrión.
Make Davis the host, no?
Yes.
Yeah, that would be excellent. Yeah.
Yeah, for the.
Thank you, Carlos. And
I was saying
translation, Jeff.
No, it's hard. It's hard. It's not hard to understand. It's hard to remember everything, and then so I'm writing the notes and everything.
Jeff.
You did a great job.
Okay, Davis, I think you are now.
Well, for me, good morning.
Hello.
Good day.
Thank you for invitation. And I will apologize that I will talk in Spanish because I don't feel confidence to present in English.
Okay.
Okay. Well,
pero si tienes confianza en mi traducción es la cuestión.
No problem.
Vamos poco a poco, poco a poco, porque si no, no me acuerdo.
Okay. Just a minute, I will share with you my presentation. Where is it? Here. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bueno, voy a presentar un estudio de caso que es parte del proyecto de investigación que fue coordinado por el profesor Les y con mi participación, con participación de Carlos y también de Edmundo Galo del observatorio. Pero hoy voy a focar en el estudio de caso de Baixada Santista. Bueno, para empezar,
so I'll present a case. I'll present a case study, part of research project coordinated by Les with participation with Carlos and the Mundo Galo de Observación, something like this. Yeah. And the case study is of which that was in Portuguese. No.
Yes.
So what's the case study of again?
Sobre Baixada Santista.
Sobre Baixada Santista.
Yeah, yes. To be explained.
Yes. Bueno, Para empezar, es importante comprender que nuestro proyecto de investigación se ha desarrollado a partir del encuentro de dos conceptos importantes en Brasil: la economía solidaria y la agroecología. Entonces, son dos conceptos convergentes en nuestro proyecto y que son muy importantes porque se ponen como conceptos contrahegemónicos.
Okay, so to begin with, it's important to understand that our project developed out of two really important concepts. One is the solidarity economy, and the other is agroecology. And these are two concepts which are counter-hegemonic concepts, so they're very important to understand.
Sobre economía solidaria, partimos del concepto desarrollado por el Fórum Brasileiro de Economía Solidaria.
For the solidarity economy, we start from a concept that was developed by the which forum?
Economia Solidarity Economy Brazilian Forum.
So, okay, there it is, by that forum, Solidarity Economy Brazilian Forum.
And Articulación Brasileña de Agroecología sintetiza, junta una serie de perspectivas conceptuales acerca de agroecología, pero un importante destaque que lo hago es que agroecología es mucho más do que una técnica de producción, pero sí un movimiento político contrahegemónico, sobre todo de crítica al sistema alimentario globalizado.
So the articulación, the Brazilian articulation of agroecology brings together many different understandings of agroecology, but crucial to them is that agroecology is much more than a technique, but it's a political movement. It's a counter-hegemonic political movement that challenges the hegemonic understanding of ecology.
Y en la Baixada Santista podemos observar la convergencia entre estos dos conceptos, agroecología y economía solidaria.
So in the Baixada Santista, you see the convergence of these two concepts, the agroecology and solidarity economy.
Algunos principios de economía solidaria que adoptamos como principios conceptuales. Primeiro princípio é a valorização do trabalho humano. Então, na economia solidária, não se pode explotar a mão de obra por meio de el assalariamento. A plena satisfação de todos necessita uma criatividade econômica e tecnológica. Well, it's described in English. Not necessary to translate. Recognition of fundamental place of women. It's essential in economia solidária and agroecology. There is one slogan in agroecology that they say, no existe agroecología sin feminismo. Entonces, la cuestión de género es esencial, tanto para economía solidaria cuanto para agroecología.
So there's a saying that says there doesn't exist agroecology without feminism, no? So it's essential, the essential part of it.
Esencial para dos perspectivas respecto a los procesos de la naturaleza y los valores de la cooperación y de la solidaridad. Bueno, hay muchos más otros conceptos. There are a lot of most of concepts in solidarity economy that I would like to underline,
to highlight, yeah.
To highlight that is special. The autogestión, self-management.
Self-management or self-organization, self-management.
Yes. Self-organization, yes. In some principle of agroecology, the new approach to integrate the agroeconomic, agroecological, and socioeconomic principles to understanding and evaluation of the effect of technologies on agricultural system and society as a whole. Galtieri. Glisman says, agroecology is the integration of research, education, action, and change to provide sustainability for all parts of the food system, ecological, economical, and social. It's transdisciplinary as it values different forms of knowledge and experience aimed at transforming the food system. It's participatory as require the involvement of all subjects, from farmers to consumers. Esto es una cuestión esencial. Agroecología no se termina en la producción en el campo, pero agroecología para nosotros es un proceso de involucración del campo con la ciudad, con la organización de los consumidores también, por su conciencia al respecto del trabajo en el campo.
So this is an essential question. Agroecology doesn't end in the production of the fields, but it entails the involvement of the rural and the city
Organization.
And organization, yeah.
This approach is based on ecological thinking, where holistic understanding of sustainability of food system at various levels is needed. Bueno, aquí só para ustedes tienen una mirada sobre el contexto del desarrollo de agroecología en Brasil. Agroecología hoy está distribuida en todo el territorio. Aquí son los círculos, son experiencias de agroecología de diversos tipos. Este mapa se ha hecho por la articulación brasileña de agroecología. Y la tipificación que está aquí son consumo responsables, fair consume, like this, or fair concern.
So here you have a look at the context of development of agroecology in Brazil. You can see that it's distributed throughout all of Brazil, and the typification here is you're saying fair,
organic fairs,
organic fairs, yeah,
policy, publics, cities,
municipal public policies, open food Brazil, yeah,
yes, like this. And this is it's one red, it's a net of consumers consumidores organizados en la metropolitan region of São Paulo. That's
network of organized consumers in São Paulo.
Yes.
Yeah.
Bueno, aquí están los conceptos que unen la agroecología con Ecosol. Socioeconomic equity, dialogue of knowledge, traditional and popular and academic. This is very important. Diálogo de saberes, gender equity, economy of proximity, and nature conservation.
So these are the things that unite the eco-solidarity with agroecology, these concepts.
Bueno, esto es el logo de nuestra investigación.
This is the logo of our research.
Que fue soportada por Art and Humanities Research Council and Global Challenge Research Fund.
supported by those organizations.
This is the three areas that we developed our research. Here is Baixada Santista. Here is north coast of São Paulo and south of Rio de Janeiro, and Tarija, where Carlos
was talking about, yeah.
Yes. Baixada Santista is located here. This is São Paulo State. São Paulo State is in southwest of Brazil. This is in the center littoral, coastal center of São Paulo. There is 9 cities that compose this region, metropolitan region of Baixada Santista. It's important to destacar el Fórum de Economía Solidaria, que es una organización que es nuestro socio en esta investigación. Es un colectivo.
So he wants to highlight this group, Forum de Economía Solidaria, who's their partner in this investigation, in this research.
Este fórum es parte de uma estrutura desarrollada antes de existir una política nacional de economía solidaria. Nació.
It's an organization, part of a network that was born before there was a policy at the national level.
Nació dentro del Fórum Global Social.
It was born inside of the World Social Forum.
Esto es contexto espacial de Baixada Santista. Es una área del punto de vista de la naturaleza muy sencilla, muy importante por su biodiversidad. Son rainforest, tropical rainforest, los últimos remanescentes de floresta tropical en litoral. Hay también ecosistemas costeros.
So this is the spatial context. There's lots of biodiversity. There's a littoral biodiversity. There's coastal biodiversity, ecosystems.
Yes. Y es una región intensamente urbanizada por varias actividades económicas, dentre ellas el turismo de segundas residências.
So it's an intensely urbanized region, but because of various economic activities, including tourism, second residences, second homes, yeah.
And the major puerto de la América Latina is in this region.
The biggest port in Latin America is in the region.
Un gran polo petroquímico.
Petrochemical place.
Well, it's importante resaltar las actividades económicas porque la urbanización lo ha hecho una especie de sufocamiento, no sé cómo. No sé
suffocating.
Yes.
It's important to highlight the economic activities because of the suffocating effect.
Ha sufocado la producción agrícola en la región. Entonces, el sistema de alimentación de esta región, en su mayoría, viene de fuera. Son comprados.
So it suffocated the agricultural production, and so most of the agricultural stuff comes from outside. Most of the food comes from outside.
Por el otro lado, este sofocamiento y todo este desarrollo económico ha despertado la organización social local para que busquen alternativas de vida, con una mejor vida, con una vida más solidaria.
So on the other hand, this suffocation has awakened a kind of mobilization of people looking for a different form, a more solidaristic form of organization of agriculture.
Y nosotros empezamos a interpretar cómo estos grupos y estos colectivos se organizaron, cuáles las motivaciones. Y partimos de investigar los circuitos cortos de producción y consumo de alimentos limpios, alimentos sin agrotóxicos, a partir de las iniciativas que hay en la Baixada Santista.
So we began to interpret how these groups or collectives organize themselves. We started by looking at these short supply chain production of food, agro food, which was clean without agrotoxics.
Mas é importante que no início do projeto não estávamos na pandemia e tivemos que cambiar todo o processo de investigação que se ha desenvolvido em sua maior parte por acompanhamento por lives, por comunicação remota.
So it's important to understand that in the beginning of the research, this was not in the pandemic, and so everything had to change when the pandemic happened, and so it had to be changed from live to remote research.
Entonces, conceito importante para que pudéssemos analisar as iniciativas foi o conceito da economia da proximidade.
So one important concept for analyzing this was the economy of proximity, which we talked about.
Uma das subconceptos da economia da proximidade é a proximidade geográfica.
Subconcept of the proximity is geographical proximity.
I think it's not the best term, geographical proximity, but the space proximity. Why? Porque é uma proximidade em termos de distância entre as pessoas, distâncias espaciais. Então, é uma vantagem estar próximo espacialmente.
So the reason he prefers spatial proximity to geographical proximity is because it's about the sort of social distance or the spatial distance between people.
Proximidade organizacional é quando as pessoas se identificam por ser parte da mesma organização ou organizações que têm similaridade ou proximidades.
So organizational proximity is when people feel close because they're in this organizations with proximity or because they have affinities.
Cultural and institutional proximities. Se há uma identidade cultural entre as pessoas, isto facilita a comunicação e o sentido de pertenencia.
This is in Spanish, somebody speaking from Brazil.
So cultural and institutional proximity is when people have an identity, a cultural identity. This facilitates the communication between them.
And proximity of purpose is proximidade de ideológica ou de proposição de ideias.
Ideological or idea proximity.
Well, em la Baixada Santista, uma das questões que identificamos é que a liderança de los grupos, a maioria são mulheres, aunque muito do trabalho feminino não ha sido computado, não ha sido computado em geral em la produção que se desenvolve no território. Então, há uma necessidade de se resgatar lo que, o se computar, lo se considerar o trabalho da mulher para além de la producción agrícola propiamente dicha.
So one of the things that's interesting about these organizations, the majority of them have a feminine leadership, even though there's a lack of computing or of looking at the work done by women in the organization. So there's a need to do that, even though you have the feminine leadership of the organization.
Es importante comprender que las mujeres tuvieron un papel muy importante durante la pandemia por desarrollar estrategias de comunicación para poder garantizar la distribución de los alimentos producidos en las áreas rurales.
So it's important to emphasize that women played a very important role during the pandemic. Strategies of communication to make sure that food arrived in the rural areas.
También nosotros conseguimos identificar en cada caso que estudiamos os vários sentidos de proximidade. By identifying the various proximities in each case, the participants of the initiative can better understand the current ecosol networks. Entonces, conseguimos también traducir para los involucrados, los grupos que investigamos, traducir para ellos a nuestra interpretación. Hicimos un papel de tradutor, como llamaba Bruno Latour, una traducción de nuestra interpretación sobre su realidad y desarrollamos un diálogo con ellos.
Interesting. So we managed to identify proximities, and we also managed to translate our interpretation for them. So we played a role, like as Latour has this idea of interpreters. So interpreting, sharing their interpretation of what was happening.
Pero esto solo es posible porque nosotros somos considerados parte de su red sociotécnica.
Yeah, but this is only possible because we're considered to be part of their technical network, social technical network.
Sorry, can you just sort of explain that a bit more? Because I couldn't sort of wrap my head around that.
Explain more about what?
Sorry. I'm sorry, at one point we're talking about the women's roles, and then we talked about interpretation, and I couldn't quite interlink those two.
Hay una cuestión del trabajo de las mujeres, porque en la agricultura, quien trabaja más en la principal producción son los hombres. Entonces, lo que es computado económicamente es la producción principal, aquella que los hombres desarrollan.
So there's a question of the work of women, because the principal production in agriculture is done by men, and so that's what gets computed. But on the other hand,
las mujeres tienen un papel económico también muy importante. Por ejemplo, acerca de la casa hay una producción de frutas, de hierbas medicinales, y quien desarrolla este trabajo son las mujeres. Y esto no es computado en resultado económico final.
Yeah, so women, on the other hand, women play a very important role around the house, in particular, where they grow fruits, they have traditional medicines and the like, and these things are not computed.
Porque la mujer tiene, aparte de la producción, también el cuidado de la vida. Esto no es muy bien distribuido.
Yeah, so apart from the production, the women also play a role in the reproduction of life, you know, and this is not very well redistributed or counted.
Y hay una cuestión, pero hoy hay un método que se ha desarrollado por una institución feminista que es la caderneta, one like a notebook, a feminist notebook that the women note all of your production in the day. To compute,
it's a method developed by feminist organizations. That's what he's saying.
I answered. It's okay for you?
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you very much. Sorry, I just needed it to be a bit more clearer. Thank you.
Okay. Bueno, aquí este es un ejemplo de una organización que es vinculada al Fórum de Economía Solidaria. Se llama Livres y es una cooperativa de consumo consciente.
So this is an example of an organization linked to the Solidarity Economy. They're called Free. Livres is free, no?
Yes.
Or conscious consumers.
And esta cooperativa es una cooperativa de la mayor ciudad de la Baixada, en Santos.
It's a cooperative from the biggest city called Santos.
E envolve mais de 100 famílias.
More than 100 families.
No consumo, e ellos compran sus productos en una otra región que no es muy leja, pero no es en la Baixada Santista.
So they buy their products in a region which is not far away, but it's not in the Baixada Santista.
Y todos los productos son orgánicos.
And all the products are organic.
Aquí es un ejemplo de varios participantes del Fórum de Economía Solidaria en una plantación certificada, pero no es certificada por un cielo oficial, y sí por una autocertificación.
So this is a self-certified plantation. It's a group of people from the group working on this plantation, which is certified. It's not officially certified. It's self-certified.
Mas esta certificación es importante porque es baseada en la confianza entre los consumidores y los productores, y no por un celo del gobierno.
So this type of certification is important because it's based on the trust between the producers and the consumers, and not based on a stamp from the government.
Y esta confianza se da por exactamente los sentidos de proximidades.
And the trust and this trust is given by the sense of proximity.
Este es un otro colectivo que junta varios colectivos en una ciudad llamada Peruíbe.
So this is another collective that brings together various collectives in another city called, what's this, Peruíbe.
Este es un colectivo femenino, es Unión de las Mujeres Productoras de la Economía Solidaria de Peruíbe, UMPES, muy fuerte ya.
It's a women's collective, the union of women from Peruíbe in a solidarity economy, no?
Ellas son productores, son agricultoras, artesanas y lideranzas locales.
Producers, agriculture, artisans local leaders.
Aquí es una otra iniciativa que es una iniciativa pública, que es un banco de alimentos. El municipio compra la producción de los pequeños agricultores y distribuye a las familias más vulnerables.
So this is another initiative. It's called the Feria Agrícola. It's a food bank. The municipality buys this food and then distributes it.
Distributed to vulnerable
families.
Yes. Y esto es también un soporte para los agricultores. La mayoría de la producción es agroecológica.
It's also support for the agricultural workers, producers. The majority of it is agroecological.
Com esse banco de alimentos, há inúmeras iniciativas que foram desenvolvidas na Baixada Santista. There are a lot of initiatives in Baixada Santista that I can't show for you in this short time. And I have some conclusion. There is a process in development that's involved the foundations of Solidarity Economy and Agroecology. Quiero resaltar que, bueno, estuve ahora en la reunión de CLACSO, el Consejo Latinoamericano de Ciencias Sociales en México, y pude ver ahí que no es solamente un caso específico de la Baixada Santista, pero que hay un movimiento en la América Latina de fortalecimiento de las perspectivas comunitarias y solidarias. Aunque existan ainda muchos desafíos por la frente, pero hay una gana de fortalecer las iniciativas comunitarias.
Yeah, so he was recently in the CLACSO, which is the major Latin American social science organizations meeting, and it was in their meeting, and at that meeting he noticed that what he's talking about is not only a specific case, but actually there's a larger movement in Latin America towards strengthening the solidarity economy, agroecology, the solidarity economy. There are many challenges they face, but there's nevertheless a strong sense of a movement in this direction.
Pienso que esto puede ser inspirador para futuras políticas públicas en gobiernos que sean progresistas, porque en el gobierno actual es muy difícil, pero estamos resistiendo. Vivimos sobre un gobierno fascista, pero creamos que en breve vamos a cambiar esta realidad.
So he thinks that this can be an inspiration for future progressive governments. Obviously, now they have a fascist government, so not possible. But they think in the near future this can change, and perhaps these kinds of things can be made public policy.
During the pandemic, several innovative initiatives related to ecosol and agroecology were created, and they strengthened each other. Esto fue un gran desafío, un gran aprendizado, que fue la comunicación virtual. The training process were intensified through the communication platform.
Yeah, so this was a great challenge in the pandemic, the remote virtual communication. But yeah,
and I think we could develop some skills, new skills for these communities, because a new form of proximity was created through the digital platforms. And today it could be said that we are in transition process for a new proposal for territorial development. Thank you.
Thank you. Muchas gracias.
Hello.
Oh, thank you so much, Davis. I can see that Sonia has a question.
I have a few. So firstly, it was in relation to something you mentioned at the end, where you, in Brazil, with Jair Bolsonaro as the president at the moment, and many of his policies are against environmental protection. He's actively pursuing deforestation and trying to commercialize the land rather than use it for agricultural purposes, even if it's agricultural. With that in consideration, how much damage do you think will be done by the time you do have a different leadership? And even when you do have a different leadership, how much planning have you put into place as to what how you would like to move forward with the government in terms of agroecology? Do you think that another government would be more likely to help out in terms of communal agroecology? Also, in terms of organization, if you do believe this is going to be a wider, and it does look like it if you're looking at the pattern across Latin America, if you do think this is going to be something that across Latin America people are going to be expanding on, in terms of organization, self-organization, how have you organized communities? So you mentioned that you have a women's union, but what are they advocating for at the moment in this women's union? What do they need help with? And then you also mentioned that you wanted to develop essential skills for these workers, for these people in these agroecology communities. Would that also be something that you need to add to the self-organization that you have in process at the moment? And
could you help me?
I think
can I help you?
Yes, I need
Oh no,
help.
I was taking a little bit of a rest from that. So.
Well, I think maybe I think there were at least 3 questions there, weren't there, Sonia? And
yes,
yeah,
so mostly it's in relation to self-organization, and it's also in relation to the environmental impact that an system of governance such as Jair Bolsonaro's is having at the moment on Brazil, because he's very much anti ecology, very much anti-environmentalism, pro-deforestation. So yeah, so my 2 questions are based around how they're going to manage communicating with any future administration, and the other one is how do they manage the self-organization? I mean, they've got women's union, but more than that, what else do they have supporting this community?
Maybe take the first question first around. I mean, I think that's a very interesting question about Jair Bolsonaro, and you know, how is the hegemony going to respond to this counter-hegemonic movement? How is it respond? Because he's, as Sonia was saying, he's got a terrible environmental track record, but his in a way his base is in agribusiness to a certain extent, isn't it? So, what is the response? First of all, maybe for Davis, but maybe also for Carlos or Les.
I mean, maybe I could briefly say, I mean, I tried to keep my presentation short, but since 2016, all the right-wing governments, long before Bolsonaro, tried to destroy, did destroy nearly all the support measures for agroecology, economy, solidarity at federal level. And their supporters destroyed most of those measures at the state level, which have considerable powers and budgets. There are a few exceptions. You know, so I suggest to save time here, to focus the discussion, we should look at the newly emerging alliance around the PT, Partido de Trabajadores, which has already created an electoral coalition before the next election coming up, and look at how the social movements such as the Agroecology network, the Ecosol network, are already trying to pressurize that new coalition, because that's the possibility for improvement. It makes no sense to discuss the enemy, right?
Well, I have a question related to that. It's just linking it to the Kurdish understanding of social ecology, which is kind of delinking these kinds of politics from dependency on electoral processes and electoral cycles more generally. Is there significant movement within these movements towards a more autonomous kind of less electoral understanding of what political mobilization should entail? Or is the majority thinking along these lines of, we have a new progressive government that's going to come in, we're going to lobby this progressive government to get changes in public policy?
Well, see, that's why I was asking about self-organization, because on one hand, what are they waiting? Are they waiting for the next administration, and do they have a plan for that one? Or is it the self-organization? Because they mentioned the women's union, but do they have more? They also mentioned that they wanted to provide key skills or develop skills within these communities, but does that go alongside self-organization? Is that what they're aiming for? I suppose, thank you very much actually for mentioning that, Jeff, because
I suggest we
highlighted
focus
it better than I did.
on that question.
¿Quieres una traducción al castellano?
Ah, por favor.
Sí, no, lo que yo preguntaba, lo que Sonia también preguntaba, es si depende de esa movilización de unas esperanzas de llegar al gobierno, o si mirándolo desde la perspectiva kurda, por ejemplo, los kurdos quieren desarrollar una manera de hacer movilización política que no tenga que ver con las alianzas electorales, de llegar al gobierno, del gobierno progresista va a implementar unas políticas públicas distintas, sino que están autoorganizándose para hacer la política de forma más autonomista. Si hay corrientes dentro del movimiento bueno.
Sí, sí, no hay duda que hay los dos movimientos, y algunas veces muchas veces hay conflictos dentro del grupo, porque hay aquellos que quieren una acción autónoma de cualquier gobierno.
So there's definitely a tendency in movement there's a conflict within the movement between different parts. One part which is more looking for a more autonomous way of doing politics, and other which is more looking for electoral alliances and progressive alliances and things like that.
Why are those ones that are looking for a more electoral process? Why are they confident that there's going to be different administration? Why are they confident? What is making them confident in moving towards a less autonomous route?
¿Qué es lo que les hace tener confianza los que miran hacia el proceso electoral al pensar que un nuevo gobierno va a cambiar las cosas?
No tenemos ninguna garantía y las cosas que las cosas van a cambiar totalmente, pero certamente diferente de este gobierno.
Porque we have no guarantee, but it will definitely be different from this government.
So if there is no guarantee that the next administration will be different, this administration that is currently deforesting and dismantling the ecological and environmental systems in place, if there's a guarantee of that, then is the reason why they're waiting for another administration because they don't have confidence in the current organization within the movement. So they want to see more stability within it before they put all their eggs into that basket, if that makes sense. So as you mentioned, I've already said as well, the women's union is there, but what are they doing to protect the women within that union? What are they doing to protect the women and their work? What are they doing to educate the women? And then more than that, again, you mentioned giving key skills to these workers. Is that what they're waiting for? They're waiting for some stability, some structural formation to take place before they say, actually, okay, we'll go for the autonomous route rather than the waiting for another administration.
Thomas, quiero hacer un comentario.
Okay, he wants to make a commentary.
Okay.
Aunque hay grupos que piensan en hacer una acción desplazada, separada del gobierno, todos los grupos están ahora escribiendo propuestas para el futuro gobierno progresista.
So even though there are some groups that want to do something autonomous from the government, all of the groups are writing proposals for the new government.
Y una otra cosa es que el futuro gobierno ya percibió la importancia de fortalecer las iniciativas que ya existen organizadas.
So the other thing is that the future government it sees the importance of strengthening initiatives that already exist.
Mas sabemos que a luta política não é tão fluida assim como estamos falando.
And we also know that the political struggle is not as fluid as what we're talking about. Les, do you want to add something to this?
Yeah, I don't think anybody is waiting for anything. That's not really a description.
I agree with you.
They do. I mean, everybody hopes, of course, that the next government will reduce the destruction of the last few years and will restore some of the support programs for agroecology from during the PT governments. But nobody is waiting or simply waiting for that. I think all these movements are trying to use the current opportunities to extend their activities and to build their capacities, right? Through the, for example, in the Baixada Santista, that network was organizing such capacity building activities for many years, sometimes with funds from international organizations, sometimes which had much more funds than, say, a local municipality, but with the sponsorship of the municipality. And that process has continued, despite the hostile attitude of the federal government. So these efforts continue, but with very little funds being available. I mean, paradoxically, I suppose the pandemic gave an opportunity for demands that the government continue its purchases of agroecological food to feed vulnerable people, more so than before the pandemic. It was a kind of paradox, perhaps. But now, of course, that is in decline as the pandemic declines. But these efforts continue with variations among the organizations, variations across the different parts of the country. Now, I don't know the exact internal debates about exactly how to do this, but I don't think anybody is simply waiting. And there's a key phrase, de debajo hacia arriba, from bottom up, right? I mean, all the social movements, I think, are taking up this phrase that the support measures should be bottom up on the model of the current initiatives, which have very little support from the state. So almost by necessity, they are bottom up, or they wouldn't exist, and that this model should be expanded with more state funding. I mean, this phrase is popularized by national and local networks of what they call gestores de políticas públicas, the AgroEcos, and public policy officers, some of them still in those posts, some of them former officers who played that role when there was more funding. So that's my sense of the situation, and that they see the current efforts, fairly modest efforts, as pilot projects, as establishing a bottom-up model for what should be supported by a future government.
But you said that the previous PT governments had been very much along the traditional Green Revolution
well, yes, I mean, all
lines. So the question I have then is, like, within this chance for the new government to change, is there a significant conflict within the government alliance, whether or not they continue that way, as opposed to taking on, like, how possible is it for them to really change towards embracing agroecology?
mean, the PT has already made an electoral coalition with several other parties, including a truly left-wing party, the PSOL, plus a right-wing party. And nobody knows
So
how somehow
plays
this
itself
coalition
out.
will accommodate all these forces, but the right-wing party, of course, is more significant. So, I mean, I don't see any prospect of reducing the support for the agribusiness model, but there may be some possibility to increase the support for the alternative. David
Thomas,
may have a view.
Yes.
Thomas, especialmente porque es importante comprender que Brasil, en la orden mundial, es uno de los mayores productores de commodities para exportación. Entonces,
Yeah. So it's important to understand that in the global order, Brazil is one of the biggest producers of export goods.
Of course. La cuestión no está limitada a los poderes internos, sobre todo a los poderes internacionales que determinan la forma de organización de la producción en Brasil.
Yeah. So so basically, what he's saying is that given that kind of balance of forces, it's I intuit that it's unlikely that you see too much of a change by a new government.
Yes.
In the support for agribusiness, but it's more plausible there would be some more support measures for alternatives in parallel.
Yes.
In parallel, but
yes,
yeah,
and in contradiction, just as there was this intense contradiction, during the PT-led governments for so many years.
Pero no tengo duda que el próximo gobierno, aunque sea del gobierno progresista de Lula, él también va a dar dinero para el agronegocio. No hay duda sobre ello.
Yeah.
Pero
So
se abre posibilidad.
There's no doubt that there's no doubt that the new government, Lula's new government, will continue to support agribusiness, but there is nonetheless the possibility opens itself up that there could be support for these other measures as well.
Yes, exactly.
Estella.
I want to ask a very different question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Number one, given the global situation, what are your relations with any of the wider global movements all around? Because we also have similar developments in other parts of Latin America, number one. What are the relations? Do governments, for example, of Venezuela, of Mexico, of Cuba, of the Central American governments, plus then, of course, worldwide, from Africa, as we know, down to India, Southeast Asia, and in other parts of the world, people engaged in very similar struggles from the bottom up. And if you had a chance to watch our previous programs, okay, for example, on chefs, 3-4 months, spending in Kenya, working on similar projects, I would say, okay? So there is a very strong possibility, and not to talk about, of course, how we founded this project on democratic confederalism and the movement of the Kurds in Rojava. How do you see, number one, you are on this program, all right? So the links have been made to a possible connection, which would be very important for the project, I would assume, because they would get the political strength, you know, to continue to relate maybe to that which strengthens both the movements on the ground there, but also worldwide links the struggles to a global alliance. You mentioned the World Social Forum. To be quite frank, what they are doing today, we don't even know. They have not asked the movements that I know in Africa or elsewhere to become part of that social forum that is going on now. Are you not participating in that? Were you not invited? I leave it at that open question. But these are the central issues. It is not Brazil government or not, oh God. No. What are the struggles that unites us to build this needed global alliance? That's the issue. How do you see that?
I mean, that's the big question, but I think we should just explain what we did in our project, because those are the resources and the networks that we had. We saw our task as exchanging knowledge about these local and regional strategies for how to continue the circuitos cortos during the pandemic. And that was difficult enough for many reasons, including and I mean within Latin America, it was difficult enough to overcome like the language barriers between those who basically speak Spanish and those who basically speak Portuguese. So the Portuguese speakers often could understand the Spanish. And we were among many initiatives that were exchanging knowledge on such experiences all over Latin America. I mean, there was an explosion of such events. And I think those were crucial to have the practitioners describe exactly what they were doing and how they understood the difficulties, how they overcame the difficulties, how they created something new. So I think that's how we saw our role. Our reference point was, it included concepts from global networks,
Yeah,
but our purpose wasn't to try to connect the initiatives beyond other ones in Latin America, as the basis to share experiences. And I would say with a common political language, which terms that were recognized by everyone involved in these movements, so we could understand better what these terms mean in practice, the diverse range of initiatives that were creatively adapting to the pandemic and creating new connections. And then how to continue those advances after the pandemic.
I understand, yes. But, these are movements that have great experience on the ground. Obviously, with the focus on these issues. But what I'm saying now, there must have been discussions, of some type, that, how to strengthen or get support, from movements that emerged parallel, in other parts of Latin America, at least, if not,
yes,
and beyond. Because, if you look, for example, there's lots of solidarity sort of somehow with Brazil or with Colombia, with different countries. But I mean, it's like the first time I have heard about the movement, whereas I have connections, through our work in Brazil, but this has never come up as a discussion on any front. Why not? All right. So for me, this is an important issue, you know, because it has implications, you know. I mean, for example, maybe Felix can make a comment on that, given the fact of our long work and relations with India and Southeast Asia and the Adivasi groups. Okay.
Just to come in there very briefly, because I'm hugely appreciative of the presentations today. Just really clear, really beautiful. And also, as Estella is saying, it's even connecting Latin America. And, you know, I follow Ecuador in particular, which is, again, similar and yet very different with all the indigenous movements. And in India, I mean, there are so many amazing movements against the Green Revolution. You know, Green Revolution was a concept especially promoted in India, obviously, as you all know. And the reaction against it and the movements against it are very, very, very complex. But of course, I appreciate what you're saying too, Les. You know, what you were handling was Latin America and focusing on two countries, Brazil and Bolivia, in itself is massive. So just huge appreciation from my side. Thank you.
I mean, I would have an intermediary position here, because I think on the one hand, it is the I completely understand the focus on the local and thinking about making this comparison in the regional, the difficulties in doing that already. But on the other hand, I do think we are in a global situation that is unprecedented. And when we're particularly thinking about the ecological crisis being global in scope, we need to be thinking very, very systematically about how we can organize at a global level. And some of the things that Davis, I think it was Davis who was saying some interesting things about how the remote technologies allow for new proximities. Maybe you could, I'd be interested in knowing what you think about the possibility for organizing at an international level, the kind of solidarity networks, the kinds of senses of proximity that you guys are studying at the local and regional levels. Lo digo en castellano también.
Oh, maybe you translate.
Do you have time to reply, Davis? I saw that you were about to leave.
Maybe they didn't understand.
No.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I have a trip to do now. And
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. No worries. No worries. Thank you very much.
Thank you for invitation.
Huge appreciation. Thank you, David.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Adiós.
Bye. Bye, Les.
Adiós. Sí, gracias. Obrigado.
Carlos, quizás tienes algo que decir sobre el tema. Making links. There is an opportunity to begin making links and organizing transnationally that is afforded by these new technologies.
Yeah, that is my point. Okay, I mean, it's some use, you know.
Yeah, we wouldn't be able to do this. We wouldn't be able to bring in Carlos and Davis, and we've done this. We had people from Kenya who were here in the beginning of the meeting. So this is something that is possible in a way that it was never before possible. So what are the kind of tactical and strategic conclusions that we can draw from that?
Yeah,
I think that one thing they're concerned about is if they attach themselves to autonomous groups, they may lose some of the support which they are getting from the United Nations. They are getting limited support from the United Nations and from external governments. I think their concern is that if they do attach themselves to grassroots campaigns, they may lose that limited support and they may lose their route in. But that's why I asked whether the people who are a bit not attached to the autonomous idea, are they not attached to it because they're concerned that there isn't a system in place, there isn't a safety net in place when they do detach themselves from institutions that are supporting them. So that's why I think that self-organization is the key, because before they do make any decision on whether they want to go fully autonomous or continue with their partial support from governance, I think they need to secure themselves. I think they need to educate themselves. I think they need to secure their position in their organization, if that makes sense. So they talked about having a women's union, but they didn't say what that women's union did. They talked about how they needed key skills for their workers, but they didn't say what communities. So for example, in Rojava, you have communities. You have the environmental communities, you have the women's community, you have the educational communities. All of these communities are in place to secure the support that they do need, so they could have their voice heard on a platform. And if they don't have those communities in place, then it's going to be hard for them to organize education in terms of getting key skills for their workers. It's going to be hard for them to organize workers' rights. So I think that's something that perhaps they need to have a discussion on.
They
How
do.
do they organize?
They do all the time. I mean, you're describing what happens all the time throughout Latin America. It's nothing new or different. So I'm not sure what's the difference that you are.
Well, I just did because I asked the question and I didn't get an open response to. I didn't get an idea of what organization was in place for that. So that's why I'm responding in this way.
I'm interested in if Carlos has any ideas that he wants to share with us about all of this.
Sure. There were a lot of issues that you guys were talking about this thing of the autonomy of the organizations that Sonia brought in the first places. I think the autonomy is relative. No, but for example, our governments, our progressive gobiernos progresistas, called popular governments, that we hope or we expect them to do things different. We have to understand the government itself. It's a place with conflict of visions, and you have in the government this vision of a capitalistic way of development, and also you have these social movements in various forms struggling there to put their vision to shape the policy of the government. So the autonomy has to struggle with this hegemonic bias of construction of the policy, and sometimes you can see, like I can speak from Bolivia, you can see indigenous movements that they have struggled. They have struggled for centuries for autonomy, and they finally could gain this government structure, but you will expect them to do things like in ancestral ways or anything, but they are the first to exigere, to demand and green revolution bias of development. So the contradiction, I think the contradiction is a key force in the policy in our governments. I think Sonia is thinking a lot of the struggle of people to make this to construct a new kind of state, like we did in Bolivia 15 years ago. This struggle to the plurinational state. And it has it has these things like you were saying about the technology. It may not work as we are thinking. It get us together, etc. but it creates the opportunity. Now in Bolivia, like for these autonomy things, we have laws and we have this constitutional law that creates an opportunity that we didn't have before. Now people can struggle with a certainty to gain things that 20 years ago we couldn't dream of. Now, yes, we can. We have something there in the constitution of our country, like, for example, food sovereignty, plural economy, autonomous territories for indigenous peoples, and other things that it's in the law, and we can fight and we can struggle to develop policy towards that is the objective. 20 years ago, we couldn't even think of it. No, and I think this thing that the government as a contradiction plays it's important not to forget it works that way, and we have to be constantly developing our esfuerzos to
efforts
to gain place in this struggle in these fields. I'm not sure if I could have made me understand, but I think
very
Gramscian,
very Gramscian reflections.
Oh yes, yes. In Bolivia, we had the social movements. We had this Gramscian people that helped it. So of course we have this, but it's part of our construction.
Yes, yes. Very good, thank you.
What I'm talking about in terms of local, sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can't see you though. Very good.
We have in Turkey a very interesting situation, where of course something like the Kurdish movement, has linked up with all minority and religious, ethnic, other groups to, to build the opposition within, okay? Which seems to me a kind of, I make irrelevance like in Brazil or any right-wing government, that, the need to link up, which you are actually doing on the ground, okay? Meaning to say to build a kind of network on the issue, on this issue. And is that what we are talking about? Okay. I mean, Jeff, if we are talking about the HDP, to create this kind of democratic alliance on the ground up, starting with obviously certain issues with the Kurds, whatever it is, and then linking up with all the groups, alternative parties, alternative ethnic groups, movements, whoever, okay, to build this pressure group from below. I think that's probably what I understand what they're trying to do with this project. That's my point here, okay?
Yeah.
So it is not the same thing like in Syria or whatever, okay? I think it's more like HDP, building from the ground the alternative within to put pressure to build a democratic, sort of social.
But for me, I think that the issue is if there's not a delinking from the state, the way that I think Davis said something that was very revealing and along the lines of some kind of what Les was saying as well, which is that there's no hope. There's no hope that there will be a fundamental break from the government with respect to the green revolution policies. There could be a supplementation where they create a little bit of space, which is still going to be, it's never going to escape from a subaltern space.
They are not going to get it, but my point is that
from exactly from within the state.
Until governments are overthrown, Okay.
So the question is there a way that we can be organizing transnationally beyond the state? So underneath the state and beyond the state, does it make sense? Does it make sense for us to be spending our energy to really be thinking about this hard? Or are we condemned to be thinking in terms of the state?
That may be a false kind of choice. I mean, we always have to think about the state, but it depends on which state and where, and what movements are making what demands.
Which state is capable of breaking away from the global capitalist order?
Well, I have no idea, but well, except in Rojava, but I think
That's not a state. That's not a state.
Well, that lies beyond the.
He thought that the plurinational state could be, but
yeah, I mean, but it's one thing to have a state that actively destroys alternatives. It's another thing to have a state that provides some space and support for alternatives, and that realistically, that's the objective of the movements in Latin America.
Estella, you're muted. You're muted. You're muted.
How to do that?
Estella, you're muted. You're muted, Estella. You're muted. We can't hear you. You're muted.
Estella, I'm asking you to unmute.
Maybe it's for the best. It looked like she was saying some mean things to you, Les.
Oh, that is a right-wing dictatorship, okay, fascist state, okay, and we have the HDP surviving there, okay, continuing with the work to challenge the state. Right? So it's, you know, I mean, I'm not saying that's an example for over there, but there's certainly similarities. Okay, how do you challenge a state? And the Kurds have found a way to do that, or they're trying to do that. Okay, so I mean, it's definitely one way. That's why I'm saying I'm reminded what he tells us, our friend Stellas and Les. You know, it's a similar struggle in a way. They understand that. You know, they are not expecting, you know, to be resolved by any future state either, maybe. Okay, you never know. I mean, they didn't resolve it in the previous Brazilian state, you know, where you had, you know, the so-called revolutionaries up on the top because the bureaucracy never changed and they didn't really resolve these issues either, no? Okay, so
I just think I understand the possibilism, the pragmatism with which you approach it, Les, but I think that the situation, the global urgency of the coming catastrophe makes it so that I really think that we need to be thinking, we have to be thinking beyond the state at this point.
Mm-hmm. And I think also trying to point out Rojava as a unique example of a space that is standing up against the state and state narrative is a bit unfair on Rojava because it means it's only one minority of about 3 million people compared to the vast number of people on this earth. Rojava shouldn't be the only people showing that there is a third way. It should be all of us together. We've shown that there is a need. We've shown that there is a capacity. It's about stitching us together. It's about having the strength to say, actually, yes, I agree with what these people are doing. I agree with the third way. And it's about uniting with them. Yes, it's hard to remove yourself, to extricate yourself from the support that comes from the United Nations and the US. But you also need to understand that for as long as nation states support that model, it limits the work that they can do because it has to go along with the narrative that the United Nations wants you to provide to the rest of the world. So you won't be able to do all of the work you want to do in agroecology because they'll limit that to support.
I think that's partly right, but it speaks to also the issue that part of the reason why Rojava has managed to do it is because Rojava had no alternative. The state collapsed.
The state not only collapsed, the state not only collapsed, but it left the Kurds in the most precarious position because we faced total total
annihilation.
genocide if we didn't do something.
So where people have the other options, they go for something that is more comfortable, is what it seems like. The Zapatistas are kind of an example in Latin America of people who do something a bit against the state, which is interesting because I wonder how they fit into this discussion. But it seems to me that in general in Latin America, the Zapatistas are very much countercurrent, that most of the Latin American left remains very wedded to the state.